Mr. Chairman, you may begin.
Good evening, welcome everyone. This is the January 4th, 2023 meeting of the Eaton Finance Committee being held in a hybrid fashion with those present here at the Great Plain Room in Town Hall and then certain persons attending through Zoom. Our first order of business is, as it is for all our meetings, is to see if there are any citizens who would like to address the Finance Committee.
Mr. Chairman, I see no hands.
Hearing or seeing no one, will move then on to our next matter, which is approval of the meetings of the minutes of our last meeting, which was on December 14th. Louise has distributed those. A new draft came out today with certain revisions that were made, and so it's those minutes, draft minutes as revised, that are subject to a motion to approve.
Mr. Chairman, I move their approval.
Is there a second for Mr. Alex?
Second.
Any further discussion or comment? I think I need to take a roll call on that because of the hybrid nature. Okay. Vic,
Aye.
Louise,
Yes.
and Josh.
Yes.
Jim,
Abstain, I wasn't here.
Barry,
I abstain as well.
and Carly.
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes, so those pass. Excellent. Okay, we'll now turn to the continuation of our department budget hearings, with the first one on for this evening being the Historical Commission.
Mr. Chairman, we do have Laura Dalton joining us. The historic commission.
And remind me, Louise, who on our group had that? Did anyone?
We didn't
We
assign.
didn't assign. Okay, so Laura, if you'd like to speak to us on the budget request from the Historical Commission, which is
Of course.
tab 12 in our book.
Of course, for our princely sum of $1,050, we anticipate possibly using that for a project on displaying homes lost to demolition in the past few years, and possibly funds used in connection with our proposal to establish a local historic district.
So this is a funded level service budget in the amount of $1,050. Does anyone have any questions about that or for Laura? Okay,
So I would just ask, so you said that the commission discussed establishing a local historic district, but these funds are not related to that, right? This is for plaques and other things related to historical properties?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you, what the exact possible uses of funds are. I'm understood there to be administrative. We are just giving commentary on what our upcoming
Okay.
possible activities are that might require using some of these funds.
I think the answer is yes.
anything further? Anything, Laura, that you want to say to us, or are you all set?
I'm all set. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for your time as well. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, then let's go to planning and community development. And who in our committee has that?
Carol and me.
That's tab 20.
$289 electronically.
Is Jean McKnight joining us?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Lee Newman, who should be an attendee,
He's there.
and Jean McKnight, my vice chair, is also present. And Lee will handle the presentation.
Is that how we're gonna do it, Carol? Are you guys gonna say anything first, or you wanna go?
Yes, we are.
Okay, then why don't you,
So
the floor is yours.
I'll start and then Carol will fill in. The first things that I like to do is just to see what are the changes between last year and this year. And they do have your usual steps, increases with respect to salary and wages. So that's going up about $24,000 as a result of that. The big issue, which Carol may have some other commentary later, is that there was a position that was partially funded both by the CPC as well as the operating budget. And there was advice from town council that was received sometime in November or December. I'm not sure exactly how the issue was raised, but the town council opined that it was not appropriate to have CPC monies fund a person who was quote unquote supporting community housing if it wasn't actually to create new housing. So this person who works on our housing plan for the town was funded partially by CPC, partially by the operating budget, and now, because of the opinion of town council, they're looking to shift that funding obligation away from CPC and into the operating budget, which would be an increase of $28,500. And so that's the genesis of the DSR4 request that is in the budget. And that's kind of the biggest chunk of what's new from last year. So as a result, their salary and wage temporary line jumps by almost $29,000.
Jim, can I
Yes,
just add to that? They also are increasing, it's very modest, but they're increasing the hours
Right.
necessary for the housing specialist by 1.5 hours, reflective of the additional work that they anticipate to comply with the MBTA kind of community housing plan. So,
so it's still a part-time position. It was point maybe 5. I don't even know what I didn't do as well in math as Louise, but I think it's 0.54 now is the FTE equivalent. But that's the biggest increase that's kind of out of the ordinary. Couple of small things. There an increase of $1,000 for professional and technical line item, $700 increase for office supplies and equipment. And then $1,600 for expenses, but Lee, if she has other information, that would be great, but in essence, it basically is a reflection of cost of living increase as it's occurred from the prior budget year, as well as just their experience as to what they may be seen in the new year. But those are small dollars compared to the increase in the salary and wage line. As a result of this, if town meeting approved this additional $28,500, it would mean a 10% increase in the salary and wage line, which is obviously much larger than we would normally see. But as I said, there's an explanation for it.
there's also, did you want to mention the DSR 5?
Actually, I was gonna pass that to you.
Okay.
Before we do that, just with respect to currently on this, handling of the position. I understand next year we're moving into the budget. Does it mean this person's not, how's this position being funded currently as we speak in January of 23?
It's CPC currently.
Partly.
Partially.
Yeah.
I think it's partly CPC.
So that being said, you can do that, but you can't do it starting next year.
We probably couldn't have done it
But we are doing it.
back when we did it. Now that we're doing it, we can't do it again.
I mean, honestly, though, I know that that's a written opinion and.
I'm not sure I
And
agree
you're
with
all
the opinion either,
attorneys, so
yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
But it seems curious to me because the role of this position, and Lee, you can chime in if you'd like to, but the role of this position was largely to kind of put forth and track a database of affordable housing units in the town of Needham. And to be, an author of the Needham Housing Plan. So to the extent, you're not just creating affordable housing units magically with no human intervention. So there has to be an administrative cost associated with that, aside from just bricks and mortar. So I do take issue with that opinion, but
And the purpose of this person is to create a database and an inventory of affordable housing for people. So it's, the notion that it's somehow not creating affordable housing, in my view, is also misplaced, but then again, wouldn't be the first legal opinion I've lost.
But I guess one of my other points is last year, we went through with CPC, the funding of it, I mean, where was this opinion then? And where, I guess, can someone tell us how this all came about? I mean, why afterwards, when there was plenty of opportunity to present this as an issue? And it seemed to be, town council was certainly present at the time. Why it is that all of a sudden out of the blue, there should be looked at, and then this sort of change of path.
It's my understanding that there was another position in town that was being considered. I'm not sure what position it was, that was being considered for funding, through CPA funds. And when that position was being reviewed is when this issue surfaced. So when I was preparing my budget, I was instructed actually to check in with town council in light of the research that had been done on this other position to see what his opinion was on the continuation of the housing specialist, given what the issues that he had raised regarding this other position. And it was at that point in time that he issued the opinion that we really could not use the funds under CPA anymore. He viewed the position as being broader than the definition of what was contained within the statute, and in particular, I think an opinion that came out of the Department of Revenue.
It looks like the Department of Revenue issued some guidance. Based on that guidance, this opinion was generated.
That's my understanding.
Do we have a copy of the opinion?
We have a copy of an email,
Yeah, there's no letter or any formal.
and we don't have the guidance from the, if
So-
there is any such guidance.
So, yeah, DOR issues those guidances all the time, but tab 2028 to 2029. I think at least half of the activities of the housing specialists are new. Affordable housing. So this is a position that was partially funded through CPC, partially funded through the operating budget. So I myself, we think we need more clarity.
We gotta contend that the part coming from the CPC is a part that's legal.
So I don't think, I think to the extent that CPA funds can be used for new affordable housing. And I mean, there are a number of activities. I don't know how we pay this person. I would assume, they fill out time sheets and they can tell us whether it's a third, a quarter, a half, whatever, of their time that is spent on new housing as opposed to existing housing development.
So what they wrote in their email, Attorney Heap said, the problem is that the DOR states in their IGR ruling that by definition, expenditures in support of community housing must be, quote, for the purpose of making housing affordable. And he therefore saw that this particular position was not for the goal of making housing affordable. Now, I don't get it either. Carol didn't get it. I suppose we can always go back and ask for a
Yeah.
further clarification. But that's what we were told.
On bank.
And Lee, by the way, to her credit, she also, I shouldn't say this, not that she completely disagreed, but she completely disagreed. with-
Well, no, Lee, I pushed back on it, but Chris felt that this was the appropriate approach, given the finding that came out of the Department of Revenue, and he's town council. I respect his opinion.
Oh, yeah, no, we get it. Yeah, we understand that, yeah. But the only other thing is, and I know it's not a ton of money, so it's 29,000. Is, I hearken back to all of these positions that we ultimately and eventually approve when we're told there's other funding sources. And then these other funding sources somehow miraculously disappear and they end up in the operating budget. And I know historically, that's something we've always been, concerned about, whether it's a grant, whether it's something that comes from the federal or the state government. What's going to happen when that funding source, dries up, and then are we now stuck with running the same program? So the answer is yes.
Well, and we've been half funding this since 2017.
Right.
Do we, if we did push back and whether we any reason to believe that the CPC would have trouble continuing this funding if there were a different opinion? Because I'm suggesting we may want to ourselves push back with town council.
I don't think so, right, Lee? This is not a CPC issue.
This was not a CPC issue. This was really a legal issue about what was a legitimate source of funding for this position. I mean, and it's a position that, you know, we've had since 2017, and it's a very important position. This particular person was a staff person for the creation of Needham's current affordable housing plan, which we're just now completing, and is going to be actively engaged in all the planning work that's coming out of our, you know, requirement to meet the MBTA guidelines to come up with a plan to address our share of the housing needs for the region, which is going to all unfold over the course of the next year and a half. So, I mean, it's a very important position, and the person that fills it, I think we're very lucky, is a person who serves as a housing consultant all across the state to numerous communities who are developing housing plans. So we have a really high caliber person sitting in this role. I think we're lucky.
All right, so I think we flagged this as something for further discussion with town council and also with the CPC itself. So, and I'll, you and I initiate how to go about doing that. Anything else?
So
Carol and Jim, before we turn to planning board members and Lee?
the only thing is, and Lee, maybe you can jump in and explain that the other thing that is included in their plan is the DSR 5 of $50,000 to continue the small repair grant program.
Yes, sure. So I'm for sure most of you are aware of the small repair grant program, which I think we started in fiscal year 2020. And we've funded this program now 3 times in fiscal year 20, 22, and 23. Each, I think, in the dollar amount of $50,000. So to date, we've allocated $158,000. And we've actually committed during that time $108,000. And we're planning a funding round in January of this year, which is a second funding round for the allocation that was made in fiscal year 2023. And I anticipate we'll probably use up most of the remaining $41,672. So this is a request to continue what is a popular program. I think it's helped a lot of the residents of Needham do some minor repairs to their homes. And so we're looking again to fund it for fiscal year 2024 in the dollar amount of $50,000, which has been the historical practice.
Dick?
Yeah, there's some confusing dates. I'm on tab 20-3, but the discussion of the department, let me get this, Department of Housing and Community Development. I assume that first date, August 2023, should be August 2022. But then it says guidelines are due by January 31st of 2023. So that's like 3 weeks. Could you elaborate on that? What's involved? What are the financial implications?
Well, the first, I mean, you're talking about the
I
guidelines.
think this is,
for the-
so Dick, you're jumping back from the DSR 5
Yeah,
back into the MBTA
Thanks.
multi.
yeah, I'm sorry.
No, okay, I just want to make sure everyone.
Switching
understood.
gears here.
Yeah, so you're switching gears from the DSR 5 to this
Yeah.
question about the MBTA multi-family zoning.
So do you want me to address that then?
Yes, please, Louise.
Okay,
I'm
so
sorry, Lee, I apologize.
the DHCD process has a number of timelines that the town has to meet. And the first time, well, the next timeline that we're looking to meet, which is a requirement, is basically this in the middle of an action plan, which is due at the end of January of this year. Essentially what that is the state is looking to have us outline how we're proposing to actually comply with the guidelines and our timeline for doing that. They want to know if we have an existing housing plan. They want to have some ideas of some of the approaches that we're looking at, which are also articulated in our housing plan. what our plan is to move forward. And I think we're looking at doing planning throughout the current upcoming calendar year 2023, with the goal of having zoning ready to present to town meeting in compliance in 2024 at the May town meeting. And then, of course, if there's any slippage there, or there's a problem, or something doesn't work out right in the spring, we have the fall of 2024 as a backup, because we need to be compliant with the zoning in place by the end of 2024. So the next step is this January. Essentially, it's a questionnaire that the state has put online. Then they're asking questions. Do you have a housing plan? You know, what is your timeline, you know, and strategies to get to town meeting? And Jean, actually, Jean McKnight is here, and she was the chair of the housing committee, and she could probably give you some additional information on next steps.
In particular, what I was concerned about is, it says by January 31st, the end of this month, we submit a proposed action plan, including a timeline for any planning study. So that sounds to me like there are expenses associated with that, and I'd just like to know where we are on that.
Well, we have monies in our budget that you allocated for planning studies. And the state is also making some funds available to help communities meet these goals and objectives. And so we're currently looking at some of those funding sources to augment that the state is providing, to augment the funds we currently have in our budget. So we don't anticipate requiring any funding beyond what has currently been appropriated or is represented in our budget.
If you'd like me to address what's expected over the next year in terms of work on this project, I'd be glad to do that.
So maybe Dick's question is there something in place that you intend to submit on January 31st? Is that a hard deadline that you need to comply with, or is that something that's aspirational from the state's point of view?
It's a hard deadline. It's a questionnaire that they have online that we have to answer. They ask questions such as, do you have a housing plan? What are some of the housing approaches that you're looking at to secure compliance? What kind of community outreach are you anticipating to engage in to meet this objective? When do you think you might be presenting your zoning that will lead to an implementation? They're trying to see what your strategy is and plan is effectively over the course of the next 2 years to get to the compliance, which is due at the end of December of 2024.
Jean, anything further you want to add to that?
Yes, we anticipate leading up to the 2024 May town meeting, interaction with the Department of Housing and Community Development, so that we submit what we'll be submitting with this action plan is a general idea of our approach. And our housing plan actually is very clear on what our approach is. But then before we actually go to town meeting, it's worthwhile to work with the Department of Housing and Community Development and say exactly what it is you're going to be doing this year to comply. Get DHCD to kind of say, yes, that's great. You do that, you'll be in compliance. And there's going to be quite a bit of planning involved in that effort, so that we don't go to town meeting with something that ends up not being acceptable.
And let me just ask this question. Is the planning limited or focused on changing zoning? Or is it that plus actual plans for the development of affordable housing and construction of affordable housing?
It's focused on changing the zoning in the particular way that the MBTA community's law and guidelines require. And I could go into detail on it if you want me to.
No, it was just a question of whether it's not only zoning, is there actual, monies for that either development or construction that need to be part of the plan in addition to the zoning.
There are
Sounds-
not, and
Sounds like.
there are not for compliance. The housing plan itself goes beyond compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. It makes some recommendations that eventually, over the years, could involve money, such as the Emery Grover building and what its future is going to be. But nothing specific right now.
Thank you. Dick, was that satisfy your question?
Yeah. So,
There's clearly a typo in here. I think that meant it's August 2022 that
Yeah.
DCHD.
Thank you.
set of guidelines.
Thank you for catching that.
I was hoping the next one was a typo too, but.
No, I didn't think it was. I didn't think it was.
This is all about changing, cancer housing around MBTA stations.
Lee, can I go back to the DSR 5 on the 50,000? Is there, do you have a kind of a chart of what, I don't want to know people's names or locations, but just a chart that shows the types of repairs that have been authorized and done over the last several years?
Yeah, let me get a.
And could you, could that be something you could please send along? Again, no personal information, but just outlining what are sort of the categories of work that's been done under this program?
Sure, I would be glad to put that together and get that to you.
Thank you.
Second paragraph. DSL 5.
Yeah, I know, but this is what things are eligible. I want to know what's been done, actually. So I think this would be good to.
Sure, we can.
I
we
think
can
one
put
of the
that
things
together.
we need to, what we were gonna follow up on with Lee is that. And Carol and I already inquired about it. Is, in 3 years, 2022 and 23, 21, we didn't do anything. It's been $150,000 total, 50. And so they've committed 108 grand of the 150. But interestingly, 85,000 hasn't yet been paid, which is, kind of odd to me, that you'd be that far in arrears of paying these things. So Lee, at some point, probably we would want to get a sense of, if you had told me it was a third or 20%, but you're talking, I can't do the percentages, but it's at least 60-70% of the amount that's been appropriated has arguably 80% has been allegedly committed, but hasn't yet been paid. That just, I don't understand that. So.
Well, what happened was there were people who applied to do work under the program. A lot of them were elderly people who were reluctant to do some of the work during the pandemic. And so we're waiting, and they also were having difficulty lining up contractors. So they submitted proposals to do the work at their homes. We approved that work. And a lot of that work is in process, but we don't pay for that work until everything is complete. And so that, I think that's pretty much the reason why and this was as of, I think, 3 months ago. I'm sure that number has now gone down, and I can get you an update.
Okay, and then based on the chart that Lee was kind enough to give us, there's basically $42,000 that right now is not committed, but you're going to entertain additional requests coming up here in January and February
That's correct.
for that 42,000. And then they're looking for 50,000 for the next fiscal year. So I guess the only thing I would be concerned about is if the money is just out there and for whatever reason, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's just getting contractors in, I think we probably just need to keep an eye on how much money we're putting aside to do these programs as opposed to getting them completed.
I agree with that.
That's the only thing I would say. Carol, was there anything?
Adam, anything you wanted to add?
No. Well, we, other than, coming up in May, we intend to modify, to see some zoning reform to modify the ADUs. And to allow in the SRB district by right, I would request from the ZBA, three-car garage, which would make their caseload substantially easier. So we'll come back to you, in preparation for a town meeting, as we get our ducks in a row.
Can I ask
Josh.
one more question about the small repair grant program? Well, last year we had a conversation with DSR fives, and it seems like this one is recurring year over year. And for other similar ones that recur year over year, we had a discussion and kind of came to a conclusion generally that if we approve of an expenditure year over year, it should be in the operating budget rather than a separate warrant article. I guess the only drawback is if it takes more than a year
Yeah,
to
well,
allocate fundings for approval. Does that often happen, Lee?
well, it's happened under this program. I mean, because of, I think of the nature of the clientele that we're serving. And then, of course, we had the issues around the pandemic. So I think it needs to cross fiscal years.
Yeah, otherwise it's gonna be you use it, lose it, and we're gonna be losing most of that 50 every year. Yeah. I have a question not related to this.
But within planning.
It's within planning, it's just not related to this topic. I was ready to move on to another topic.
Just for the new year, she just wanted to say something.
Please ask the question.
Now, so I have a question about the home funds, what the amount is that the town is eligible for, and, do you have a breakdown somewhere or history of the expenditure of the home funds? And this comes up because that's one of the activities for the housing specialist.
The home fund program, and if you remember initially, we were getting grants. We were getting a pass through of almost $50,000 a year.
Yeah,
Which came to a conclusion when the funding out of the Department of Housing went down. And Newton moved basically to a program where the only pass through that we're getting as a matter of right every year is to cover a minor administrative cost. And then the money is basically put into a pool and it's competitive among the member communities. So it was felt that when Needham got to a point where it had a project that was appropriate to submit to home, we would submit an application to home for funding under that competitive arrangement that the consortium provides for.
and have we?
We have not. I think we're waiting for something coming out of the housing authority or some other significant project in town when that was timely.
Thank you.
Any further or additional questions or comments on the planning?
Only one, because I have to. So Adam, great article. Okay, it's great. But unfortunately, I'm one of these schmucks that grew up in the town. And I actually love the Muzzy intersection. And I appreciate what Fred Muzzy and his family did for the town, which is traditional, fantastic, historic, part of our July 4th activities. So it's not of light.
So I appreciate you raising that. And I raised a number of points and that comment that.
They picked up on.
Yes.
Okay,
Was distorted. What I was saying with respect to the blight is that for a while now, we've had, when the buildings were up, they were, the water feature hadn't been continued. And the lighting on the site had not been what it was many years ago, when it was a feature in town as the gateway. And further, when the buildings have been demolished and there's nothing but a fence around almost 100% of concrete, that's, that was the origin of that comment, and it was seen to, it was taken slightly out of context. So I appreciate your comment. I felt terrible when I read it because that was not how it was intended, and yet sometimes the media can get the best of all of us. If you know a good media expert who can help train me, I'd be open. to-
No worries. No worries. I just am a person who's, been around for a couple of days and I don't ever want to diminish the contributions of some of the people that have made Needham great. And Fred Muzzy was one of the people that made this town great. He really did. And, you can talk about the Roaches, you can talk about the Carters, and, there's many of them. But I appreciate what you're saying, and I apologize, John, but these things just they hit a nerve.
I understand that. I appreciate you raising that. But I'm sorry how that was.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think your biggest challenge now is gonna be making sure that actually some construction
Right.
starts.
Yeah, that it
Well,
happened.
And
We had an application, we approved the decision.
Right.
And now it's gonna be a function of the market
well,
condition.
right, the world I operate in,
Yeah.
when I'm not here in this room. It's gonna be a tough road.
Well, that
It's gonna be a
road
real-
up to
it's gonna be a real- it's gonna be a real tough road. And so I'm just fearful what we're seeing there right now is something we're gonna be seeing there for a long period of time. I hope I'm wrong. But it's, I'm fearful.
It was a very long process. And the market conditions changed dramatically from the beginning of the application, which I think might have been March, April, whenever it was, to December, when the Michigan decision. Has been dramatic. And it will take time for them to secure, ideally a single tenant that can occupy most or all or half. And start with that, and they can get a secondary and tertiary tenants. But you're right, under the prevailing market conditions, it's gonna be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's a twofold problem. One is the tenant or tenants
Yes,
and securing them. And then two, it's the financing part.
course.
They're sure the models that they had, and I'll stop at this, when they purchased the property are very different than what the models are
Yes.
right now. And I think they're, I just hope we're not looking at that the way it is now for a while, but
it's a
we're gonna
real
find out.
concern, but hopefully, some of those loans will turn out to be, short term and refinance down.
Mr. Chair, as a follow-up to that point. I know it's the beginning of this article. We're basing our planning and community development on a plan that was study completed in 2011. Is it appropriate to revisit that plan, given what's happening now, or?
Someone want to speak to that? Adam, Gene, or Lee?
Short answer is, it's incumbent upon us to continue these plans. And we do that in part, as different initiatives come up, but Lee, you want to speak to that in particular?
Are you talking about the New England Business Center plan?
Yes.
Yeah, well, we have done, there was some planning work actually that was done after that and some rezoning that was done after that. So I guess when we talk about the 2011 plan, that was a foundational piece of work that Goody Clancy did. I think then there was some work in 2015 when all the FARs were adjusted up. And it was after that that really the 128 project came in. And then following all of that, Children's Hospital came along, and then there was a major rezoning to enable that to happen. So I guess the 2011 plan was kind of the foundational piece. Then there was some additional planning that was done, which I maybe should have done a better job describing in my narrative in 2015, when we adjusted those FARs up, which then facilitated the redevelopment where TripAdvisor is now and Children's is going. And then more recently, a couple of years ago, we changed the zoning to allow Children's Hospital to go there. And the good news is that Children's Hospital now is looking for building permits. And we anticipate that they're going to be moving forward now with that development sometime at the beginning of this year, actually, because we're in 2023.
Ask a question, once Children's is completed their first phase, what % of that whole business park will be developed? Or what will be left to be developed? I mean, just roughly, is it 80%? Is it 50%?
No, there will be two buildings remaining. Center 128 east, which is where Sharp Ninja is, and where the apartments are, and NBC Universal, that piece of it's done. So what remained was Center 128 West, which was basically TripAdvisor that they're building, and then there were 3 other buildings that were supposed to be built. So Children's is now going to go forward with their building, and they have, I think, the opportunity or the option to do the 2 remainder buildings. So after Children's goes up, there'll be 2 remainder buildings that need to go up, and some
Okay.
ancillary structured parking.
And that's basically if the park will be fully occupied or utilized.
That component of the park, I mean, the park was rezoned, and
Yeah.
so there's the redevelopment potential on remaining properties there. But those were the 2 major redevelopment schemes that came after that rezoning happened, Center 128 East and Center 128 West. But there is still development potential in the park as a function of the zoning we did. And I think probably the Coca-Cola property, which is not going to be redeveloped, is that one large property that really strategically could have offered a lot of redevelopment potential under the zoning scheme, but just not being utilized.
Thank you.
All right, anything further on this budget? If not, Lee, thank you very much. Jean, thank you very much. Adam, thank you very much. Jim and Carol, thank you for your work on that. Okay. Next, we have building, design and construction. I see Hank is here. I see Catherine's here. Welcome. And I see Stuart's here as well. So why don't I just give a brief overview, and then Hank or Stuart can supplement required it. So this is in tab 2 of your book. And essentially at the global basis, it's a the amount that's being requested is essentially a level a service and level amount from last year based on the headcount in the department, which is 3, correct? Hank?
Correct.
Which is Hank and Ken Sargent and Catherine of the 3 positions. There's actually a little bit of a deduct in the salary amount this year because in FY 22, Steve Popper, who retired in that year, was in during the first quarter, I think, of that period, and was at a higher rate than the current personnel, and so that's why it's actually going down a little bit. For an overview of activity in this current fiscal year, FY 23, the summer and fall was spent in getting the Hillside School ready for the school department to move into, and that has now taken place, and the school department is now operating out of Hillside. The Emery Grover project was put out to bid successfully, and the contractor has started that project as of Tuesday, I believe. And we'll be continuing on with a expected completion of spring of 2024. So that, and then the other hard construction that's going on is the demolition activity at Ridge Hill, which I understand is essentially done with some finishing things to be done this spring. Correct. So that's sort of what the hard projects are in this fiscal year of 2023. There are studies that are being undertaken as well. There's a utilization study at the center at the Heights, aka the Senior Center. There's a theater sound and lighting study being done with respect to the schools. And then the library is having a space utilization study, and the PPVC and this department are involved in each of those studies. And then in the summer coming up, the summer of 23, in addition to Emery Grover, there'll be work in replacing the RTUs at Broadmeadow and Elliott. And then also the Pollard Locker Room project will be going forward this summer as well.
Yeah, the RTU replacement at Broadmeadow and Elliott, the schematic design will be done by summer, but the construction things yet to be done.
Okay. So I think is that accurately depict what the current activities are?
There's also a study that will be beginning with the Public Works DPW complex facility.
But that needs to be, that hasn't been funded yet.
So the study has, but none of the construction has.
So, and then, so that's kind of an outline of what the base budget is and the base budget request, and then there is a request, a DSR 4 request, which I understand is to bring on an additional project manager as of July 1st, 2023. And why don't either Hank or Stuart speak to that?
Yeah, Hank, have you given them that sheet that shows all projects and along the timeline? There might be useful to the committee is that if you look at the amount of work and you draw a line on each of the calendar, you start to see where there is a real crunch, especially if everything kicks off. We don't expect every single study will lead to a major project, but I think there's enough work there that's concerning to get the appropriate coverage. So I'll let Hank carry through just an approximation, but I think where you start to see the July going forward, there's a lot of parallel projects and activities. Especially, I think one other tidbit Hank might be worthwhile is that you can't just bring somebody on tomorrow and have them up to speed and running tomorrow. There's a little bit of a leeway there based on all the dynamics and stuff that goes on. But Hank, you want to just highlight where the real crunch is and what we anticipate?
So the top ones are the hard construction. And then there are all the studies that are underneath. The biggest one, which is sort of an unknown, is the school master plan. The intent, I think, is to submit 2 echelons, both for Pollard and going to prioritize Pollard. That, I guess, is part of the and however, to do those SOIs will be initiated next week with the intent of getting those into the MSBA by April, their April deadline. And then if we're so lucky as to be, well, then they would come out and do building interviews and go through their deliberation process. And we would see whether we're brought on board by the MSBA for one of those projects. And the town will have to decide what to do with it or not. The other ones, you can sort of see where the final reports are. So for school theater, sound and lighting study, and also the heights space utilization study. I don't know whether there'll be any funding for those 2 projects in May. Otherwise, it would be postponed or delayed until October or even for a full year. Library space utilization study, we're looking for a final report next summer. And Broadmeadow and Elliott, we will be going through, I think that the 2 construction phases would be the summer of 2024 and 2025. But we still haven't finalized even the feasibility yet. And the preliminary pricing we're hoping to get by the end of this month. And the Public Works Facilities Improvement Study will actually be looking at revisiting the 2015 study that was done by Weston and Sampson, which then resulted in the construction of the fuel island and the Jack Coswell building. They'll be looking at a variety of alternatives, either consolidation or reconstruction using DPW. And again, it may come out that there'll be a phased more dispersed solution versus a consolidated solution. And then finally, we have been, both Catherine and I have been assisting the Climate Action Plan Committee in their work. I've been focusing on the net zero buildings because that's probably most alive to the PVPC's mission. And whether this town, Needham will do what a lot of the other towns have done, adopting a climate action plan, and heading toward net zero on the building. So those are the various studies that are in process. There are a lot of questions out of which ones will proceed into detailed design and construction during FY 24.
I guess that's my, I understand the value of the project management position, but there's so many things in flux, and right now, certainly as we sit here, we don't know what, if anything, is gonna go forward. And I think there are, no one wants to fund a position that's not, for someone who's not gonna have any work to do. I think we can adapt if, either we get to the spring and we see that things are gonna happen, to look at funding this, or if things develop during the fiscal year, whether through the reserve fund or other places, or included within the appropriation or appropriations, to fund personnel that's needed to act as project managers on this. But I think that until there's a little more definition, understanding and appreciating the need for the position, I think we need to know a little bit more before we just say we're gonna go forward and have a brand new position ready on July 1st.
I don't disagree if I can step in, I don't disagree with that. I think what we're trying to do is, and it's more from a departmental level, is having the foresight to ask the question is, don't do anything, and then inside if there is stuff that goes forward, we're trying to balance it. If we have to then fund a project manager within the contract, we know outside project managers will be more expensive than internal. We prove that time and time again. But the same token is the bet is that we think there's going to be some things going on here, and it's just they're already sort of overloaded now. But I think your point's made. I mean, it is important. I think if there is, we would just ask if you've got an ability to fund at if you can't fund it now and don't go forward doing that, that you reserve something in your mind and in your due process, recognizing that these things start to hit, there is going to be a massive crunch on the limited stuff, especially if it gets into construction stuff. I think the school stuff will put a tremendous amount of demand on it.
Yeah, and we showed that when there was crunch time before, when you had, C.D. Williams going on and the police and fire going on, and it was obviously the department was bigger at that time.
Right, and we were able to get Ken through that process.
Right, and I expect that whether it's, again, as I said before, whether it's through some reserve fund allocations and or appropriate, including it as part of the appropriation, that when town meeting votes in favor of it, that there's opportunities and places there that I think we can get that.
Yeah.
So this is helpful because it puts in one place the things that are going on, but to Hank's point below, when these studies are completed, that's no guarantee they're gonna be acted upon. And I don't think it would be right to hire someone, at least right now, and say, yeah, we're gonna fund that position without knowing a little bit more about what's gonna happen with us.
I guess I wanted to put it forward, just to alert everyone.
No, that's great.
And also, we wouldn't necessarily have to hire that individual July 1. I also know that the project manager position as part of the DPW took them many months to fill. So it's not going to be an easy position unless we get a real downturn and people are beginning to look for work. But if there are alternate funding mechanisms in the future, then that's what we're going to do.
Any questions from committee members for Hank or Stuart? I think we're set. Very good. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Okay, next and last item on the agenda is the discussion of, the facility financing. We call it Bible, what do you? I'm gonna call it the too big for Jim to read. So he's waiting on an executive, summary.
A tale of two cities.
So we're,
Here. That's funny, the first 48 pages.
Okay, that's not an executive summary, Barry. So actually, I will just ask, I'd love to have a real, streamlined version. I don't need all of the dialogue back and forth, but I do need just, kind of what the nuts and bolts. I mean, the old days, admittedly, I'm dating myself again, 15, 20 years ago, it was about a 3-pager. And I understand, now 3 pages mean 52, but it's just hard to get through 86 pages. It's a slog. And I do want to read, I do want to understand it, and I do want to read it, so.
So, Mr. Chairman, I prepared the outlook, and I think the best approach is just to talk about some bullet points. What was behind the assumption? And what if those assumptions were to pan out, what the impact would be in terms of debt service. In terms of developing a plan, the first thing is I take any project that has already been approved and is ongoing. The assumption is that the entire appropriation will be expended. So therefore, I'm assuming that on the first page of the document, the projects that have been authorized that are still ongoing, the assumption is that all that money will be spent and we will be borrowing. So that's one important aspect. Second thing, the project cost and timing. The project costs are based upon what was requested by the proponents of the various articles. There is no assumption that the project would be less than what the proponent is seeking, or that it would be higher than what the proponent is seeking. And in terms of the timeline of the project is based upon that which has been laid out by the proponent, where they would indicate that, for instance, the school buildings where they're looking at a 3 or 4 year timeline. The importance of following that timeline is we don't borrow all the money on day one. We borrow the money as we go through the project to meet the cash flow needs of paying contractors and for the supplies, looking every 6 to 12 months out. So the assumption in terms of developing the bonds and when payments would begin, that is all built out in the table showing the number of bonds. That contributed to the volume of paper because rather than condensing into one stream, I wanted everyone to see each individual bond with it. The next component is other projects in addition to the 4 that are under consideration. And to pause for a minute, the 4 is the Pollock middle school replacement, which would make the Pollock, which is currently a 7 and 8, make it a 6 through 8. The High Rock School conversion from the 6th grade center to an elementary school. The 3rd is the replacement of the Mitchell School. And then the 4th would be the Public Works project and for the operation. So those are the 4 projects that caused the result of doing this outlook. In addition to that, on page 2, I provided a summary of all the projects that have been identified over the next 5 years. That have been requested. The funding source as of the date of this document is that it will be funded by debt. And what those costs are. Just like the current project, the assumption is the requested amount will be the amount that would be authorized and the full amount would be used.
There are two,
Dave, on just a quick one,
Sure.
are those amounts that are set forth there, amounts that are considering escalation costs between now and then, or are they what those projects would cost in current dollars?
These are the projects that the proponents have submitted, and to the best of my knowledge, they've been inflated to reflect the projects. For instance, in 2028, the fire engine versus the 2025 fire engine. The cost differential is partly to do with the inflated cost, what a fire engine is anticipated to cost.
Right, so they do sync up then, that the amounts here sort of sync up to what they're expected to cost in the years.
Correct. The, I have also laid out, some significant projects that are proposed for both the sewer and water enterprise, funds, which are also laid out. The, other consideration is interest rates. Interest rates, I, generally use a 7% interest rate. Now I've not paid a 7% interest rate coupon rate in the last 40 years. That's as far back as I can find the records. But it is mindful that we're looking at project timelines here, and we're looking at having debt out until 2060. And interest rates have been at historic lows for several years. The assumption that historic lows are going to be for another 40 years is not reasonable.
I think your practice is well served. It's well served the town for the entire 20 years you've been here. So I don't give any criticism at all of that. I would continue to do it.
And with that, and that's the number, because there were questions asked, well, what are the interest rates the town has been paying? And recently it's been 5%. And so I did, for illustrative purposes, show the same projects, same timeline, same cost at a 5% interest rate. And as you see in the table, it's not a material difference in terms of impact. The number of years that we're exceeding the 3% measure or the 10% measure are only differ by about a year. So folks, the 7% I think is prudent. I continue to recommend that's the outlook and to present it to the citizens of the town in that manner. But the interest rate is not the driver of the cost. It's the project that's the driver of the cost. The other piece in terms of determining these ratios is our revenue assumption. In the case of the general fund, within the levy limit, basically our recurring revenue, looking out over the historic average, is that our revenue grows in the 4% range on average, good years, bad years. Last several years have been exceptionally high in terms of revenue growth. That is not going to continue, in part the build-out of Needham Crossing has happened. That's also not going to continue because eventually they're going to run out of homes to knock down to build a much larger homes that are much valuable. And another contributing factor, which definitely will not continue, is although it was very inconvenient and continues to be so, the Eversource build out with natural gas and with the redundancy in electric, all that added significant new taxable value. That is, those wires, those pipes are taxable by the community on a property tax. That's personal property tax is what they are. Well, they've been invested tens of millions of dollars in that. Of course, not going to continue. So for all those reasons, look, notwithstanding that that revenue growth has been higher in the last few years.
David, could I ask a question on personal property? It doesn't that personal property tax continue? I mean, it's not a one-time event.
Not a one-time event, but we're not going to get another $30 million in new growth.
The increment.
Yeah,
Right,
Yeah.
correct. That's
yes. So where we had a 6% year or 7% year in growth, we're gonna be back down in the 4. And that's why I look at a 4% and I rounded it to a straight 4% assumption. And in the case of the sewer and water enterprise funds, I've assumed just a conservative 2% growth rate in those revenue streams. Because that debt is incorporated in this plan. We also have to consider the revenue component. And then lastly is the CPA, and the CPA is assumed to grow at 4%. Somewhat obvious that the tax levy is going at 4% CPA, but it doesn't always work exactly that way, because some taxable property is not subject to the CPA surcharge, most notably personal property tax. And there is allowances for affordable housing reduction. So the important understanding revenue, understanding the debt, then we get into the percentage. We're taking our debt service and we're dividing it by the revenue. The 3% that we often refer to is the general fund debt within the levy limit versus the general fund revenue that's recurring. So that's not excluded debt. That's not the debt exclusion, which is general fund. And it's not one-time monies that may be used from time to time. It's the actual recurring property tax, state aid, and local receipts. And we take that general debt service that's within the levy limit, and we take that total divided by the total of those 3 revenue sources. And then we come to the equation of what the debt ratio would be. And the policy is not to exceed 3%. There is the second measure, and that is the goal that total debt service compared to total revenue would strive to be 10% or less. And that would be general fund within the levy limit, debt exclusion, CPA debt, water debt, sewer debt. The total of that over the total of the water recurring revenues, sewer recurring revenues, CPA recurring revenue, debt exclusion revenue, and the general fund within the levy limit recurring revenue. And that's where you get into doing the calculation to get to your 10%. So quickly on page 10, you will see that based upon the projects that are all laid out here, the timelines that we talked about for the different projects, and I'm not going to read the specific times because it's all in the document. And the revenue growth assumption, we're seeing here that at a 7% interest rate, that total debt service over total revenue would be exceeding the 10% from fiscal 28 to fiscal 2039. And whereas at 5%, it would be exceeding from 2028 to 2037. And
What do you mean 5%?
Assuming
Assuming
running
interest rate.
it at 5% interest instead of 7.
Got it,
in that
Got
5% interest rate,
got it.
and for the 3% within the general, within the levy limit, at 7%, we're looking from fiscal 26 through fiscal 2034, that we're projected to be over the 3%. And even at 5%, we would be over from 2026 to 2033.
How does this duration of being in excess of the limits compare with other periods of time when we have been in excess of the limits?
Well, we've never been over the 3%. We've managed around the 3% and that continued. And so that is new. The 10%, we've been over the 10%. We're not over the 10% this year, and actually 2023, the first line, those are the real numbers. And of course, at 5% or 7%, you're seeing the exact same numbers. The reason is we already know what our debt is in 2023, and we already know our revenue. And so it's based upon the actual interest rate, based on the actual revenues, and that's why they're identical.
But David, if my recollection is correct, the times that we've been over the 10% has been on a very limited basis, so it was never something that was 8 straight years.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
No,
sorry.
it was, I think, done for at least 3 or 4 years. It was discussed at the time that we did it. I was on the board when we did it. And it was understood that we were gonna make this compromise to be able to get the projects done that we needed. Because we knew that within 3 or 4 years, we'd come back down. And that was the plan. That was the plan that was presented to town meeting and to the taxpayers. So, correct?
That is correct, that there's been the original plan and then it dated back to the high school project at the turn of the century. That project that would be over 10% for several years, which we were, and brought it back down. Then we had yet another project that pushed it up over the 10%. But in terms of the length of time,
But then also the amounts over the 10% here, I think have not been done before. In other words, I don't think we've ever had 15%.
and the
Never.
No,
and you're correct. So
So it's 2 parts. It's the length of it and also the amount over the 10%.
yes, it is the duration, and the peak is also higher than in previous plans. And of course, the factor that's driving this is the compressed schedule of the 4 projects. Now, I have to remind everyone that the High Rock School in this plan is assumed to be financed by cash, because it's only several $100,000. It's a building that was done about 10 years ago, and it's a fine building. It's just some retrofitting that would need to be done. But it is part of but the use of that building as an elementary school is part of the plan associated with the Pauling Middle School and Mitchell School projects.
So Dave, is there a way to sort of do the opposite of this and say, what could be borrowed in the years? What would be available in the years to keep us consistently at 10% and consistently at 3%?
That, well, 3% is easy to do. That's because that's how we do our planning.
All right, so in those, in the 3%, essentially, we sort of have those projects there, but I think it's more, because it's sort of in my simplistic non-numerical mind, it's like, they've obviously shown a plan, these are all the things we'd like to do, when we'd like to do them, this is what they're gonna cost, and they obviously violate in significant ways our policies. Is there another way to go about it and say this, to keep our policy in place, this is what would be available over these years? And so it's not obviously their plan, but it might be.
Yes,
what
showing
they
the
do.
timeline in order to say to be at 10% for 30 years. What is the distance between the projects? That is doable. The factor that I would need is, of course, I would have to know the factor to inflate the cost of the project, is that we're speaking of, rather than doing a project in 2028, but it's rather going to be in 2038, so we need to know what the project cost of that is in 2038. Certainly, whatever the guidance is for that index.
Maybe I wasn't making, I wasn't maybe necessarily clear, but is there a way of sort of saying that, sort of divorcing the project and not even thinking about a project, but what would be available to be borrowed in 28, 29, 30, 31 to keep us
What's under the
so
cap?
we could
Yeah.
do,
In fact, you
right,
say, what's
so
the
we could
available
do
funding?
a $30 million project, we could do a $60 million project.
Right, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Not very well, but,
We understood what you were saying.
I can try to develop something.
because I really think that's kind of where we're heading toward, and I'm only speaking personally, is because I don't see how the plan as it's currently exists can be done without us, we can't be done. So, unless, we walk away from all our existing policies. So if that's the case, then do we say, okay, now let's look at what we can do? Again, not looking at the projects, but just looking at what dollars can be done. And then saying, okay, these are what dollars are available, then maybe fitting projects into those dollars. Fair?
I actually think one other probably even better exercise is looking at this right now. We've got 3 or 4 years where we know these things are likely coming up. What would we want to put away in the reserve that can mitigate what, over the next 3, 4 years that could mitigate getting over, that we could use to mitigate and keeping our within our limits. And that would have implications over the next 3 or 4 years for expenses that we would be willing to incur, or expenditures that we would be willing to incur. And look, if we pick a number, if $5 million a year for the next 3 years in a reserve would mitigate significantly going over these limits, then maybe that's the better way to think about this and approach it, so that we can plan for the next 3 years to find $5 million
But
a year.
the place to get those funds is in your total debt, and that requires an override. We don't have that money.
No, he's suggesting
No.
we reserve out of the operating budget.
Correct.
Right,
Well,
cut basically expenditures.
maybe you've changed your mind, but a long time ago, Dave, you told me that was never a good idea to have what they call a mixed question, right? It's a question that involves both an override plus cash.
I'm not implying, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we're all, to do these schools, we have to have an override. That's a given, and we know that. I guess my point is, if we could put away, because
And use that money to help offset the cost of the project. So
not
that
the
you can-
cost of the project, the cost of to mitigate, to contribute
The debt
towards the
service.
debt
It's
service.
the same thing, the cost of the project, so that you'd be reducing the debt. So you'd be coming
You're
closer to
reducing
the,
the debt service. The
Right.
project is, and we've done that, we've done that in.
So you're
before.
saying just take excess cash and accelerate prepay our debt to these.
Or you can put it in the
No,
debt service
no.
stabilization fund, that I
Exactly.
personally
Yeah.
don't like. And I have to do
Well,
that every single
yeah.
time.
I'd like to hear from
And
Dave on this,
reduce the
because we raised
debt
this
service.
10 years ago, and the answer I got was it's not a good practice, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, let me just using rough numbers, just using, if our debt service on an annual basis is 30 million bucks.
Mhm.
And it's gonna go up to 40 million bucks as a result of of these projects, is the actual debt service is the interest plus whatever the amortization of the bonds are, and, my point is, if you put away $10 million over the next few years, you keep that debt service number at 30. And so we don't violate, we won't be in violation of the.
You're still in violation, you just have different funding source. for it.
Yeah, and
Correct.
my problem with that frankly is you're ignoring the 10% element. Because if we had $10 million more of revenue, that would fund $1 million worth of debt at 10%. It doesn't fund, 10.
Right, no, I understand
and
that.
and so that leverage. I think we're kidding ourselves doing that.
Oh, I
also
also,
with
but
respect to
also
the
they
three-
try to limit the projects to 70% of what they need to be, is
Well,
not easy either.
Don't think we've had a discussion about need yet. What the projects need to be. And then we have to talk about what we actually can afford to do.
Well, in theory, the master plan is supposedly what is needed, right?
No, the master
it's
plan is
just
what
the
they
master
want.
Plan, right, yeah.
What they want. That's been the whole discussion that's been missing throughout this entire 2 to 3 year process. Here's what we want.
Yeah, it's probably somewhere in between those two. It's a little discipline applied to the want, but it's still the want rather than.
I think they're
afford.
both worthwhile
Yeah.
exercises.
Yeah, no, no, no.
I'm not mitigating what you're, or negating what you're trying to get at. I think that's very worthwhile.
I certainly wish we had had this information before we went and had town meeting voted for the Emery Grover reconstruction.
Well, Jim, the funny thing is we did have a version in July and it looked very similar to this one. We were over the limits for several years, both the 3% and the 10%. So it feels in some ways that aside from the increase in interest rates, we're kind of back to where we were a year and a half ago.
But I'm talking about the project when the Embry promo was first brought up, not after its third iteration. At the third iteration, we were basically told if we didn't do this, oh my God, we'll never get it done. And we caved in. Well, the only one was Louise who didn't cave in. The rest of us did. In terms of the 3% cap, at some point there has been discussion whether or not that cap is one that is consistent with what other AAA rated communities are doing. Have you seen any change in that cap of general fund debt within compared to general fund levy?
Oh, there was as many communities as there are models for that. There are some communities that do no excluded debt, but they carry a higher percentage within their limit. There are other communities that use much more cash towards their capital projects and less debt. So it's in terms of debt levels for AAA, even is okay in comparison.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, where we're at.
At
But
10%.
No, but I'm talking, in other words, there has been discussion over the years. We all know, obviously, within an operating budget, you could spend $100 for this, you can spend $100 for that. Now, if you decide that you're gonna make it 3% of your operating budget, okay, fine. What happens if you make it 4%? It means that perhaps you're not gonna hire, the person for facilities, or you're not gonna hire this CPC person. But the point is, you can allocate, just like we all do in our regular everyday budget, we could allocate more to pay for debt than we can for regular operating costs. It's been a discussion that's, been ongoing, for years and years. When I would go to those finance committee meetings, around the state, that's kind of what they were talking about, Alan Tosti and those people. But did that ever gain any traction or?
So if I may, it was either me and John or me and Barry who met with the selectmen last time and tried to talk about the 3% and raising it to 4% and looking at enterprise funds separately from the 10%. And we got nowhere. And I'm sorry, I can't remember what year it was. It was one of those years, but we got nowhere with that.
Okay, so my other question about the 3%.
Before that, yeah.
My other question about the 3% is, and I apologize again, I tried to look at the 86 pages, but I didn't have a lot of time today. When I do look at the 86 pages, is there a list of projects that I'll be able to look at that we will now have some difficulty doing? Because based on the current plan, we're going to be so far above the 3% cap. In large part because of the projects which have now been approved by town meeting and are expected and intended to be approved by town meeting. Of course, what I'm getting at is, I still think town meeting wasn't given enough information about what the impact of that $2.5 million purchase was at Charles River Street. And whether it's, spilt milk, I don't really care. I'd like to be able to say, here's what it is that you're going to have difficulty doing now if you stick to your 3% cap because of what you've just done. Is that on that?
Well, the fact is every year that's showing that we're above 3% shows that something has to give there, in order to stay within 3%. So there are projects that are all identified there that which project may not be able to go forward as planned because we need to get down to 3%.
Because we've already incurred other debt within the 3%.
Because.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll look at it again.
I think it makes you go back and forth from Dave's chart. On page,
The 2.5 million we paid out half, didn't we?
I believe, Steve was speaking of land purchase, that's financed, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think if you go to Dave's chart on page 10, which shows the years where the 3% is exceeded, and then you compare that to capital projects on page 2. If you say the first one is 2026 and 2027, you're looking at the Pollard air conditioning, sewer, Greendale Avenue. That's really those projects from there on out are the ones.
And I guess that's my point. And that's what we specifically asked the town manager and the board of selectmen to tell us. What are the projects that we will not be able to do? Because we're now spending these monies on this project. Answer, we'll get back to you. Yeah. It's very frustrating. I mean, that town meeting was very, very frustrating. I just didn't think there was full information given to town meeting. I don't know if they wanted to listen to it. Maybe they did. I don't know. But now, here we are in January, well after 3 or 4 different votes on different town meeting and special town meeting warrants, and it's very difficult to see exactly where we are when we look at the whole picture, finally.
Can I play the devil's advocate? I'm
Play
not
it.
suggesting that this is an approach we want to take, but I think there's a question that town meeting will ask. There's going to be some people that say, you know what? I don't care about these dead tables. I want my schools. So, and I think there's a lot of people that have that feeling, that have no appreciation for the give and take of priorities, setting priorities with respect to capital budgeting. So, but my question is, with a table that now looks like this, when do we lose our AAA rating, or don't we?
It's hard to forecast something you don't control.
Right.
But these rates would unlikely affect the town's credit rating. It would have to be other deterioration that would happen to the towns, whether it's to its tax base or whether it's to its budgeting practices that show that its annual operating expenses are not sustainable. Those are really the concerns. Because the major driver of those percentage increases is excluded debt, they're not viewed negatively from the rating agency as if we were at 10% all within the levy. That would be, well, then how is that impacting your ability to finance your ongoing repairs, your ongoing operation? Those are some of the factors that weigh more heavily in terms of the rating. But it's many variables, not just simply the debt. It's not just the amount of the debt makes up of your total expenditures. And at 15%, you're going to be above 15% before it starts getting concerned, because there are other communities that are much smaller that are AAA, at just the size of their tax base, they end up going up very high. But also, what steps are you taking in that some of the points finance members have been raising, how quickly you get back down to where your policies say you should.
Okay, this based on the chart on page 10, is there a way to extrapolate that onto the previous chart on page 9, which shows the average single family home tax bill, and then that if we went forward, what it would look like for years 24?
Yes, I can prepare another writing, just specific.
Yeah, to that. Can you do that? I mean, that would be,
It can be done. Yeah.
that would be extremely helpful.
Dave, I've seen you write in documents that you assume if interest rates were higher than 7%, then the town would not go through with the project. Is that because of the 7% assumption that you just haven't projected it higher, or is that a line in the sand for other reasons?
That is my assumption that if tax exempt rates for AAA community were above 7%, that means the economy overall is having problems, and you can go back to even years ago and even put the brakes on doing projects. So there's no policy I can point to. I can't even say there's a board in town that has suggested it. It's just my reasonable judgment of the community who would look at things differently, saying, no, we just can't do that now.
So Jim, I think your executive summary is gonna, we'll work on putting something together, but I think it's gonna be taking sort of 11 pages. and
Yeah, I'll take a look at it again. I mean,
A lot of it is.
admittedly, I was at work and I was overwhelmed, but
But I think, I mean, Dave, this has been a couple things. The work you put into this, with the resources you have, is incredible. So I think we all thank you for that, and it's incredibly helpful. We're not done. It's a living document, and as we went to tonight with some different things we would like to see a little bit more of and be able to pull out more. And I think this is going to help formulate a lot of discussions, both within this room and with this room and others going forward. And this is very helpful to, help us have those discussions.
And that's the purpose of it.
Great. I did read almost all of them. Very helpful. It will be useful for us to help explain. I mean, it's hard to some degree help explain it. In this-
But I mean, when you can focus it down to, those key charts and then the chart, your chart on page 10, the page 9 one, and extrapolating forward and a few other things, I think will really tell a good story. Not a good story, we'll tell the story.
I mentioned the other day, I'll mention it again. I believe under section 2 of the warrant in May, whoever wants to do it should give a debt presentation. We used to do it back in the day. And I think town meeting needs to understand why we think the way we're thinking.
I know you talked to it
Yeah.
when I did, I think
We all
when we've all been chairs, I think we've all talked to it. I know I put up a bunch of charts and I think to Carol's point, I think she's got a really good point, but I'm not sure how much it's gonna resonate with the people when it comes to push comes to shove. and not gonna get-
Well,
But
you look
I
at- when
think
you look at
John's
the average
point,
single
you gotta
family-
hang a tax number on it.
Yeah,
Right,
well,
but
the tax number in 2026 is gonna be, $28,000. I think that's when people are gonna.
It
So,
won't look like Wayland.
Yeah.
but like the town of city of Newton supposedly has a, tax calculator for every project. So if you go on their website, they have a tax calculator for kind of every, new project that they're proposing, so that, project X is 100 million and that increases your taxes by Y. And I think it would be helpful that if on our website, we, helped the town and town meeting understand, what we're thinking about and what the town is managing to and what we are managing to in terms of the budget and our capital structure. Because I don't,
Talk about the FinCom website?
to put it
Our
on
webpage.
our webpage. I mean, not that we're getting a lot of likes or hits,
I could do that.
but I think we need to tell our story constantly.
Yeah.
So that it's not something new in May.
I don't think we've done it in 3 years. Now, admittedly, I've only been here for 3 years. I don't think we've done it. So I think we should do it. And that's what Article 2 is all about.
We're going to do it. You have my word.
Is there a
Because if
plan,
they vote against us, John, as Carol says, then they do.
It's happened.
It happens more often than,
But they have to
than,
do it with knowledge,
and,
understanding.
yeah.
is there a plan to discuss this with the other boards?
Yeah, so we're have a chairs meeting tomorrow, and this is gonna come up, so. There's a lot more that has to be talked about here. Any further questions for Dave?
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Anything else, Mr. Chair?
Just our wrap up item, which is any updates from any committee members that needs or wants to share.
Had a nice wedding for my son William in November.
Very nice.
It was nice to see John there. We had a good old time. And John had a wedding in July. And it was nice to see Barry and Carol there, and perhaps others. That's the good and welfare of the meeting.
I think, so we're, Louise and I are meeting with the select board chairs tomorrow to hear about what their priorities are for the upcoming budget year. So we'll be able to report back to you on that.
Who are the chairs?
Mary Ann and Marcus. And then, so we'll have a report for you on that next week. Carol, Josh and I have been meeting with the schools on their budget. They're gonna be coming in with an increase of 5.6%. We've been chewing on that with them. We met actually with them in Hillside yesterday.
Very nice until it started to try to freeze us out at the end.
It's very cold.
But I think, and just leave you with three things on this. The master plan, which is sort of the basis for all of this, you know, to me. It's got some real issues that have to be talked about, and I'll just tell several. One is, I can't understand why we would ever do a project without MSBA funding, a school project, and we never have, and this plan is assuming like we would do Pollard completely on our own. And I just think it's a disservice to everyone in this room who pays their taxes that goes to that, and you know, that we're not somehow taking advantage of that program. I just think it's not good planning or a good idea. Two, there's nothing at all in any of this plan about Hillside. So Hillside is going to be sitting out there kind of as this hanger on, or that no one wants to take responsibility for. Okay, don't listen to me. But and it's not part of this plan, but yet it's a school building, and it's like
We're building Ridge Hill again, huh?
yeah, right, exactly. And meanwhile, they're saying they're not going to use it for swing space. But they're just kind of leaving it sitting there with zero plans for it. And then the third part is, for me, and again, personally, it's just the Mitchell School is 75 years old, and to think that for some reason that you would do Pollard again for a third time before you address that school and leave the elementary schools at 4 modern facilities and 1 antiquated facility, and have Pollard go first just is illogical.
And I'll just add one other thing, just this is anecdotally. Every school parent that I've ever known loves High Rock, loves the idea of an independent 6th grade. So I've not ever understood from this plan what the data showed that decided that they were going to change that.
I don't think there is.
Well, we were told in 2005, 6, whenever this happened, because I was sitting on the other side of the table by the school committee and the school superintendent, that this is not a short-term fix. This is for the long haul. This is what we intend to do, a 6th grade learning center.
And actually, it was that superintendent.
So it lasted for 12 or 13
Well,
months.
if you look at the demographic there, it's Pollard's, High Rock right now is the one school that's far exceeding its capacity. It's ideal capacity, I guess. The other schools right now are not. They're not, you can look at
What's the enrollment at High Rock?
480, 470. I was just looking at the updated school master plan that we use.
So the point is, there's a lot of things in that master plan that need a lot of discussion.
Also, the operating cost of a 6th elementary school, if High Rock is going to be the 6th.
That's not in there. That's not in the plan either. So. go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna, just as an aside, does any of this take into account like how the private schools now have changed too in this community, kind of that 6th grade and then the 7th through 12th, it kind of works with the way that people are sending their kids to school, I feel like around here, in a way.
I think it is.
I mean,
I
is that
think that's
inclusive?
that has to do with some of the numbers. But some of the numbers show that.
Yeah, the numbers definitely. do. So, that's just, there's a lot of things that have to be.
I think the best thing that could happen is if I could leave the finance committee and leave my town service, and Mitchell would still be in the same condition it was as I went there.
It is.
Okay,
Well, you can
I'm working towards that goal.
you can stand up like Ford Tuck and do that.
Yes.
About every.
I went to this school.
And it was a dump then.
All right, any further?
John, could I ask just for private meeting of the committee
Yes.
now.
No, yep. So we'll adjourn and then,
Yeah, well, yeah, fine.
okay, you want to do it outside of the meeting?
I just want to do it with only
There's-
FinCom people here.
Okay.
Isn't that an open
The
meeting?
public meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Well, I'll go to executive session.
It wasn't on
Needs
the
to be an
agenda,
exception.
but it wasn't on the agenda.
How about, would you mind if we had a chance social encounter in the hallway? That happens.
Yeah, we can actually, we're gonna do it in this room.
No, chance social encounters, you can look it up. We're not deliberating. You know what we're gonna
Yeah,
do?
we'll-
We're thinking of what's happening tomorrow.
I could actually probably just do you
I do, I'm just teasing. So I make a motion,
What, three of us?
Yeah.
Fine.
We'll,
I make,
no, not Peter.
I make a
No.
motion to adjourn.
Okay, is now we go to. Second for that. Second by Dick, okay.
All in favor, aye.
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 Dick,
Aye.
Louise,
Aye.
Josh,
Yes.
Jim,
Aye.
Barry,
Aye.
Charlie. Carol,
Aye. Yes.
Karen.
Yes.
John, aye.